In the shadow of Europe's mountains, under layers of rock and ice, lie clues to one of humanity's deepest mysteries. For more than a century, the Neanderthals have been painted as the rougher cousins of our kind. Sometimes noble, often tragic, always just out of reach. But the silence of bones is being broken. Through ancient DNA, a different picture is coming into focus. And what it shows is not just the story of their rise and fall, but the surprising paths that led them into Europe and into our own bloodlines. For decades, the origin of Neanderthals was a puzzle. Their fossils appeared across a vast range from the coastlines of Spain to the frozen heart of Siberia, yet their beginnings were uncertain. The old assumption was that they were a distinctly European lineage, shaped by the Ice Age environment. But new genetic evidence reveals a deeper tale. The Neanderthal genome is not an isolated thread, but a tapestry woven with migrations, climate shifts, and encounters with other ancient humans. An international team of scientists recently analyzed DNA from fossils scattered across thousands of miles. From the well-studied remains in Croatia's Vindija cave to a lone skeleton from the Altai Mountains of Siberia, what they discovered was astonishing. The earliest Neanderthals carried echoes of even older ancestors, possibly stretching back to eastern regions of Asia, before their descendants spread into Europe. This challenges the long-held belief that Europe alone was the cradle of Neanderthals. Instead, their story seems to begin on a continent-wide stage, shaped by forces far larger than any single valley or cave. One of the most revealing finds came from a female Neanderthal who lived more than 120,000 years ago in Siberia. Her DNA bore marks of interbreeding with a mysterious human lineage, the Denisovans. That discovery reframed everything. Instead of a straight path from emergence to extinction, Neanderthal history looks more like a braided river, with populations splitting, merging, and exchanging genes across vast distances. Western Neanderthals, such as those found in Spain, carried a different genetic profile than their eastern kin, suggesting multiple migrations and replacements across Europe. They were not static cave dwellers, but restless travelers whose history spanned continents. Why, though, were they moving at all? Climate may hold the answer. Ice Age Europe was a land of constant upheaval. Expanding glaciers forced populations southward into pockets of survival, only for warming periods to draw them north again. These cycles created encounters between distant groups, forging connections and rivalries that left their fingerprints in DNA. Remarkably, some genetic traces even suggest contributions from older human relatives, perhaps Homo erectus, hinting that Neanderthal origins were entangled with deeper lineages stretching back over 1 million years. The question of where Neanderthals truly began may not point to one birthplace, but to a sprawling network across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Far from the stereotype of isolated survivors, Neanderthals emerge from this genetic evidence as dynamic and resilient. Their movements were not random, but part of a larger story of adaptation to harsh environments. One key site that reshaped our understanding is Mezhmyskaya Cave, tucked within the Caucasus Mountains. There, the remains of a Neanderthal child were found, bones so delicate they might have been lost to time, yet still carrying the blueprint of ancestry. Her DNA was distinct. Unlike Western Neanderthals, she bore genetic connections to Eastern populations, reinforcing the idea that the Caucasus was not a boundary, but a bridge. It linked Europe and Asia, serving as a corridor where populations met, mingled, and sometimes replaced one another. The genetic timeline now being reconstructed is extraordinary. Between 400,000 and 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals expanded into new regions, again and again. Each migration etched subtle changes into their DNA, as if each group added its own chapter to a shared book. Some of these journeys likely brought them into contact with early modern humans, long before our species' major migration out of Africa. Indeed, traces of modern human DNA appear in Neanderthal genomes from over 200,000 years ago, suggesting waves of contact long before history's grand movements began. This redefines the way we think about our relationship with them. We often focus on the encounters around 60,000 years ago, when modern humans first spread widely into Eurasia and interbred with Neanderthals. Yet the genetic evidence shows those meetings were not unique. They were part of a much longer pattern of interactions spanning hundreds of millennia. Our species and theirs were not strangers suddenly colliding, but relatives whose paths crossed repeatedly, leaving traces that persist in our genomes today. Every person of Nan-African descent still carries between 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. These fragments influence traits from immune responses to how our bodies handle sunlight and fat. They are not relics of extinction, but living legacies woven into us. The Neanderthals are gone, but they are also here in inheritance, passed quietly across thousands of generations. Yet their disappearance remains one of prehistory's most haunting questions. Around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthal populations dwindled to nothing. For years, the answer was framed in simple terms. Modern humans outcompeted them. But DNA tells a more complex story. By the end, Neanderthal groups were small, isolated, and increasingly inbred. Genetic diversity declined sharply, making them more vulnerable to disease, scarcity, and environmental stress. At the same time, modern humans arrived, with larger networks, more diverse technologies, and social systems that allowed knowledge and resources to flow across great distances. In the end, it may not have been a sudden clash, but a slow unraveling, with Neanderthals absorbed into expanding modern populations until they existed only in memory and in our genes. Still, their resilience should not be underestimated. They survived hundreds of thousands of years of climate chaos, hunted across freezing plains, and crafted tools that allowed them to thrive in some of the harshest landscapes on Earth. They were not a failed experiment in evolution, but a branch of humanity that endured until shifting circumstances closed their chapter. And that chapter is not truly closed. Advances in ancient DNA now allow scientists to detect Neanderthal traces in soil where no bones remain, in the hardened plaque of fossilized teeth, and even in microscopic residues on stone tools. These techniques reveal that their story is far from finished. Each discovery shows how deeply Neanderthals were woven into the web of ancient humans, shaping us as much as we shaped them. The true origin of Neanderthals, then, is not a single point in space or time. It is a journey across continents, guided by shifting ice sheets, genetic exchanges, and the stubborn will to survive. It is the story of a people who endured unimaginable hardships, who adapted and innovated, and who, in the end, became part of us. When we search for them in caves, in bones, in fragments of DNA, we are also searching for ourselves. Because the Neanderthals are not just a vanished species, they are our kin. In the firelight of their shelters, in the meals they shared, in the voices we will never hear, echoes remain. And when we tell their story, we are, in a profound way, telling our own. And so, the Neanderthal story lingers, not just in fossils or fragments, but in every breath we take. They remind us that humanity has never been a straight line, but a web of connections, resilience, and adaptation. Their journeys, across frozen plains and mountain passes, echo in our own migrations, our own struggles, our own endurance. To look back at them is to see ourselves, fragile yet unyielding, shaped by the same winds and fires. Their story is not just ancient history. It is living memory, written in our very cells, waiting for us to listen. In the end, the Neanderthal story is not one of loss, but of continuity. They were explorers, survivors, and innovators whose legacy endures in us. Every time we look at the night sky, gather around fire, or share stories across generations, we echo the same instincts that carried them through ages of ice and struggle. Their disappearance was not a vanishing act, but a transformation, a merging with our ancestors that still shapes who we are today. The more we uncover their past, the more we are reminded that humanity is not a single straight line, but a braided web of lives and legacies. Neanderthals remind us that survival is never simple, and that even in extinction, memory can endure. They are not just fossils in caves or fragments in genomes. They are part of our living history, carried within us with every step we take.